Good evening and welcome to another edition of Collins County Economy. I'm Drew Crandall, your host. Thanks for watching. Earlier this year, we had Ken Kaplan on the show talking about the current renovation of the Hockenham Mill on West Main Street in Rockville. Tonight, we're going to the other end of Rockville, East Main Street, near the Shinipset Reservoir to the site of the former Roosevelt Mills complex. Joining me to talk about this project is architect and developer Joseph Vallone. Joe, thanks for being on the show tonight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. Let's start with your personal journey. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey. I was born in a little town called Lodi, and went to school up in Montvale, St. Joseph's High School, and then Pratt School of Architecture.
And Pratt School is in Brooklyn, isn't it?
Pratt Institute is in Brooklyn, yes.
And that's one of the finest architectural schools in the country or the world, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. Had a wonderful experience there. I really enjoyed it. And actually, if you're going to study architecture, I highly recommend you do it in a city.
Now, did you actually live in Brooklyn when you went to school?
Actually, I did not live in Brooklyn. At that time, my finances were extremely limited, and I was forced to work.
Sure.
So I actually worked my way through college rebuilding cars and motors.
Okay.
And then after I graduated Pratt, I'd received an offer to work for a prestigious architectural firm called Rothschild, Kaiserman, Thompson and B. And at Rothschild back in the 80s, there was the beginning of the mill sort of conversion renaissance in Manhattan. And there lies my affinity for these type of buildings, because Roosevelt Mills is really a very urban building in the middle of a suburb. But I worked on these type of projects back in the 80s in Manhattan, converting buildings into apartments.
Okay, and you saw what can happen.
Absolutely.
It must be quite a hoot to see a building that's dilapidated, run down, abandoned, dying.
Yes.
And time goes by and you pump a lot of work into it, and the next thing you know, you look up and it's teeming with life.
You know, it's interesting that you phrased it that way, because the initial proposal that I put together was entitled Breathing New Life into Roosevelt Mills.
Okay. Yep.
So you're right on the spot with that.
And for those of us in New England, you can't drive around New England very far without seeing an old, dilapidated, abandoned 1800s mill of some kind.
Yes.
And they're treasures in the rough.
Yes, this is true.
So you're working for this architectural firm. Now what happens between working for somebody and actually making that jump into entrepreneurship?
Well, I had worked with the firm for 5 years and worked on many projects in New York City at that time, and at that point decided I had taken my exam for my license, and I became licensed in 1984.
Is that a difficult process?
Yes, it was a 5-day exam which concluded on Friday with a 12-hour exam that you would show up at 9 o'clock in the morning with a drafting table and a bag of food, and they would give you the program, and you would have to read the program, sketch out a building, whatever that building was that year. It could be a library, an airport terminal, whatever. So you would sketch out that building, and then you would have to pace yourself. By noon, you'd have to start doing your presentation drawing, and if you didn't have your design down by 2 o'clock, you were not going to have enough time to finish the drawings. So it was very disturbing, where you would be sitting in this room with hundreds of people watching the person next to you at about 4 o'clock pick up the stuff and just leave, and you feel like another lost soldier on the battlefield because they had given up. So yeah, it's a tough exam, but everybody takes it, and you eventually you get through it.
And you passed it the first time?
I did not pass it the first. I passed everything. I passed all four of the other 4 days. But they only pass about 30% of the design exam, and it's very subjective too. It's it's sort of it's all done with a number. Your name is never on the drawing, and it's all. And then one person looks at the site, and then they hand the drawing, and someone looks at the building mass. It's
right.
But,
and in the midst of all this, you find a woman and you get married right during this same time period? or-
Actually, it's true. I met my wife skiing, actually. Up
Where
at
were you skiing?
Hunter Mountain on a day trip.
Okay.
And I met her skiing, and we, fell in love, got
Yep.
married. We were living in Manhattan.
Yep.
I was in Manhattan for, I think, 8 or 9 years. Then my first child came along, Sophia, in 1989. So then in 1990, we have to leave our apartment, and we moved to Westport, Connecticut.
Why did you move to Connecticut rather than back to Jersey?
My father asked me that question as well. And my wife's brother was living in Connecticut, in
Okay.
Darien, and he
Okay.
kept telling her, you should come up and look at Connecticut, you'd really like it. So, Westport at the time was known as an artsy community, and
Right.
and it was. So it was a good fit for us.
Okay. So you started the firm in 85,
Correct.
about a year after you were licensed.
Correct.
And you were a newlywed. You were only married a few months.
Correct.
You were 27 years old.
Yes.
What was that journey like at the beginning? Was it scary? Were you pinching pennies? Were you eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
I can't believe, Drew, you said that because, I always said that, it's okay for me to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, chasing my dream. You just don't want your kids to have to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. So the first few years, I ate peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. And it was very difficult because you have to, you really have to, find clients who are going to trust you. Now, I was very fortunate because when I left my old firm that I had been with for 5 years, I had been in the middle of a high-rise building.
Okay.
And when I left the firm, working off the kitchen table in the apartment,
Okay.
my former employer called me up, asked me to come in. We sat down, this is 3 or 4 months into the journey, and said, would you like to come back to work for me? And I said, well, I don't think I've really given this a shot. It's only really been 3 or 4 months. He said, well, the client that you were working with on the high-rise building doesn't like the new person that we hired to replace you and only wants you, so would you consider taking the job on your own? So here I was, 1985, 27 years old.
Right.
22-story high-rise, $14 million, which in today's money is probably like, I don't know, 60 million or something, 60,000 square feet. And so I had 2.5 years of solid work, and I went from the kitchen table to about 7 or 8 employees.
Wow. Now, here in Connecticut, you put a 22-story building, and that's a significant building in downtown Hartford or New Haven or Waterbury or Stamford.
Right.
But in Manhattan, a 22-story building is like, big deal.
Well, let me tell you, it's funny that you said that. I mean, it's almost as if we discussed this, and we didn't. We really didn't. But it's funny because when I finished that high-rise, all I could think of is, this is great. I have it made now. And I would go and talk to other clients and developers, and I would say, I just did this high-rise. And they would look at me and say, yeah, but you only did one. They could find architects in Manhattan that have done dozens.
Right.
So, I said, well, maybe I need to move somewhere else where the
Right.
22-story high-rise is a big deal.
Means something, right. So what does your firm do? You're based in Westport.
Right. My background ultimately, really is multifamily, and it's based on my experience going back before I started my firm. Multifamily residential. I'm a believer in it. I think there's a need for it. It's interesting how all the cities are now going through a renaissance, which is very interesting.
It is.
So that is really my area. But I've worked on interesting projects. I did an art gallery on 57th Street. I did several art galleries in Manhattan where was the only time you work on a project where the contents of the gallery are worth more than the space itself.
Right.
Where you Picasso's and Degas hanging on the wall. This is 10 million. This is 15 million. And here you've designed this little space which is meaningless relative to the price of the paintings. I did a firehouse. I did some interesting projects.
Well, by the way, the studio that we're recording this show in used to be a firehouse.
Really?
Where you're sitting used to be where a fire truck was. So.
Wonderful.
So how many people do you employ?
Well, right now, I have 2 people part-time. It sort of varies.
Right.
Right now that we're under construction, when we were producing the drawings for Roosevelt Mills,
Okay.
I had several people working
Sure.
with me. But now that the drawings were finished and we're in the construction administration phase,
Right.
I have a part-time person, but I do most of the hands-on because after all, as an architect, the most exciting part is when you're actually building the building.
Right. So how has architecture changed since you started your business in '85?
It's really changed. I love to draw, and I, worked many years developing my skills. Yellow trace paper and a soft pencil.
Right.
I, certainly when I was in school, there was no such thing as AutoCAD, and you had to draw. And particularly at Pratt, which is really an art school, I mean, we had to learn how to draw, and it's missing. I'm to the point now where I can sit at a table and draw upside down for a client so they can see rather than having to draw it and turn the paper around.
Right.
And I love that.
Yep.
Now, I really don't work on CAD. I certainly, I bought my first Mac in 1985. I've been a loyal Mac user for all of my documents and Excel and Word and so forth,
Right.
but I refuse to make that jump into
Right.
the CAD world.
Okay. Yep. So if I heard right, your passion for restoring old mills started early in your career
Yes.
on Manhattan.
Yes.
And now walk us through the journey. How did you discover Roosevelt Mills? You're in Westport.
Sure.
Roosevelt Mills is way up in Rockville.
Sure.
It's not exactly next door. How did you stumble across Roosevelt Mills, and what captured your imagination, and what has the journey been like?
Lots of questions.
Yep.
Let me start with, I developed a project in Westport in 1999 to 2001 actually. Right after 9/11, I was looking at another project in Westport and it didn't work out. Someone that I was working with had said that the Connecticut DEP had just come up with a new brownfield program and that I should actually look into that because they really wanted to convert and clean up many of these mills. So I made a phone call to Connecticut Brownfields. I went up to Rocky Hill, I met with them, and I said, can you please give me a list of communities that are sort of willing to work with developers to come in and clean? I said, I don't want to, I'm not the kind of person that will go into a community, I call them like the gunslinger developers,
Right.
6 guns shooting through the saloon door.
Right.
That's not my style. I
Right.
really want to go where I'm welcome and where someone wants the help, so to
Right.
speak. So the woman, I'll never forget this, she gave me 3 towns to talk to. One of them was Rockville. So I picked up the phone and I called, this will be a blast from the past, Larry Schaefer,
Okay.
who was the town administrator at the
Right.
time. And I told him what I was looking for. This was July of 2002. I remember it like it was yesterday. Unfortunately, it wasn't. But anyway, so Larry said, do you know anything about Rockville? I said, no. He said, this is an old mill town. You have to come up. You have to come up. So I said, okay, I'll make the trip. So I made the trip. And then Larry drove me around town and showed me all these old brick mills. And I thought, well, these are very nice, but, they're very New Englandy, they're very typical. And then, it's like he set me up for this. And I always tease him about this when I speak to him because I'm still in touch with Larry.
Okay.
And he said, well, we have this other mill, it's concrete, and it's, nobody
It doesn't have the
likes
same sex appeal.
He says, we call her the ugly sister.
Right.
Nobody really likes it. It's just there.
Right.
So I said, well, I'm here. I made the trip. So we pull up in front of the mill, and all I see is this concrete building with, rows of 5 foot by 10 foot double hung windows. And you can see the forms that they erected the forms, they poured the concrete, and they just kept moving it over. And that's how they built the building. And he said, well, what do you think? I said, I'm interested. So then we parked the car, we walked around the back, and then I see the reservoir.
Right.
And I look down and I see how the Snipsick falls onto Adams Pond and then drops down 14
Right.
feet and goes under the building.
Right.
And I was hooked. I said, this is amazing. I said, let's go in it. The other thing that I loved was that it is 60 foot wide by 300 feet long, with one row of concrete columns down the middle, which is very, very fortunate because that makes the division of space for the apartments very simple.
Right, because you don't have all these support columns that are in your way that you can't take down.
There are mills in this town that I've been in
Right.
that have columns 8 foot on center, and you have to either remove them and
Right.
But then the fact that the building was fireproof because it's concrete and it had 2 stairs monolithically poured.
Okay.
So now let's see, a concrete building with high ceilings,
Right.
grandfathered, monolithically poured fire stairs. It overlooked the reservoir and it overlooks the waterfall.
Right.
I said, we have to try and do something with this.
Right.
And that's how it started.
And so continue the journey. What happens after that?
So-
Where do you start?
So then at that point, Larry said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, here's what I think. I'm going to spend the rest of the year looking at other mills in the state because I really want to see what's available. I said, and I'll get back to you.
Right.
So in January of 2003, I called up Larry and I said, Larry, is the mill still available? Well, he nearly rolled on the floor with laughter. He said, yeah, it's still available. I said, well, I'm interested. So then I put a proposal together and I went to the town and I said, this is what I'll do. It had already been listed on the National Register of Historic Places since 1983.
At this point, who technically owned the mill?
Well, and that was another great question. The owners at the time had abandoned it.
Right.
And the town was in original contact, but then I think the attorneys representing the former owners were basically told the town, don't call anymore because our clients aren't available. And I don't know who they are, and it doesn't really matter. But in situations like this, the town inherits and winds up with stewardship of this because it's in its backyard. So
By default.
By default.
Right.
So Larry, I think, had worked to get the federal government up, and they did an initial batch of cleanup. They took out some lead and asbestos. They took out some asbestos and so forth. We knew it was a brownfield.
Right.
We knew it had problems.
Right.
So then the next step was, really design a plan that worked, and then appear before the town, make a proposal, and basically say, here's my list of things that I will do, and I would ask for your help to do this other list. And the town did what was asked, and I did what was asked. Then we went to the state to work on the remediation. So, this obviously, and I knew nothing about this. This is really, talk about just jumping in head first. And as I like to tell people, we had, like for appetizers, we had the lead and asbestos, which everybody has, but the entrees were, we had 30 years of coal ash in the back parking lot and chlorinated solvents and so forth, and it was a mess. And so it took years to formulate plans and to move forward.
And if I might put a little aside here, isn't part of the problem, your average person on the street doesn't know what happens behind the scenes. But aren't we really paying for the sins of our fathers and our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers? They polluted the daylights out of it.
They didn't know any better.
They didn't know any better, and and the economy, the plants were operating, people had jobs, they were making a living.
Sure.
But the downside was that here we are now in 2014, and all these properties, it just takes forever to get through all the remediation.
Well, I think that, there are serious issues with certain pollutants. And it's not my area of expertise, but I have spent enough time around this. I always tell people, I don't know everything, but I'm a quick study.
Right. And you learn a lot through osmosis.
Exactly. And there are things that are, serious concerns that have to be dealt with, but a lot of it is things that scare people that should be cleaned up, can be cleaned up, and will be cleaned up that doesn't necessarily mean you don't have a project.
Okay.
You know, I mean, there are certain things that you have to worry about, you know,
Right.
PCBs and so forth, a
Right.
serious item.
Right.
But, you know, we had a 10,000 gallon oil tank in the back that we had, that had been remediated years before. And the remediation was cleaned up to a standard at that year, but yet for some reason they didn't go back and get the sign off. So it bumped it into another, you know, I mean, there were a lot of things.
Right.
And I don't want to spend the whole
Right.
time talking about
Right.
it, but
Right.
you know, I would say that you have to be cautious.
Right.
You have to work with professionals
Yep.
before you buy. And you know, I had a wonderful environmental attorney, Paul Jacoby, and he helped through that.
Right.
That's all he does is environmental, and
Right.
it's so.
So while people are driving by, they don't think anything's happening, but behind the scenes, A, you're acquiring the property.
Right.
B, you're working on remediation.
Yes.
C, you're working on design
Yes.
for the building.
Well, right, and let's just say that before we could actually do the remediation, we spent a lot of time securing an urban action grant.
Okay.
Which you know, took a lot of time and a lot of effort, but the state contributed to that to clean that up.
Okay.
And you know, that's an important component.
Okay.
The problem is that lenders are fearful of this, and I think, you know, sidebar discussion that we
Right.
would have is that, you know, listen, you know. The process could be easier if lenders weren't so frightened, but they are, and it's just, you know, that's just the way it is.
The nature of the beast.
It's the nature of the beast.
Yep. So, coming fast forward to today, where are we at right now, and what's up ahead on your radar screen in the immediate future?
Well, okay, so we closed a few weeks ago, and we started construction the next day. And you know, I was on the site this morning, and you know, we are sort of revving up. At some point, there'll probably be over 100 people working on the project. Today, there were about 20. We have to get the roof on for the winter, get the windows in, and then we'll be able to
Right.
work on the inside of the building.
Okay.
We have a very strict time frame. We have to be finished or have our C of O by December 31st of 15.
Wow.
So we have a little over 13 months.
Okay.
And then we'll be ready to go.
Wow. And at the end of December of 2015, what will we see?
Well, you will see a building that the facade has been, the concrete facade will be repaired in accordance with the National Park standards for a historic building.
Will it be the same color?
It will be the same color. It will be patched,
Right.
and then it will receive an opaque, breathable coating
Okay.
so that you don't see the patchwork underneath
Right.
it. And then the new windows will go in, which will replicate the 20 over 20 double hung windows.
Right.
And then we will have 68 units on the second through fifth floor,
Okay.
mostly one bedrooms. And then we'll have a little community space. There'll be about 7,000 square feet on the first floor of commercial, which I suspect will be something like some type of either office or physical therapy or something like that. I mean, it's, you know, it's not really a retail location.
Okay.
You know, it's sort of more, you know, maybe an accountant's office or
Okay.
something like that. And that'll be on the first floor.
Wow. So, looking back, when you first saw the property back in what, 2012?
2002.
2002, right. It's been
2002.
12 years so far.
Yes.
I suspect that when you first had an interest, you really didn't have an idea how long it might take, or did you? Because
No,
of your
I thought about
experience?
4 or 5 years.
Okay.
I thought 4 or 5 would be the number.
Is that what it took
I
in
was
New York
wrong.
City to
No,
do
I-
these projects? Or?
No, I think, you know, I don't think they had the contamination issues
Okay.
in New York City, quite frankly.
Right.
I think here it's really very different.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, they had coal ash. They had no
Right.
place to put it.
Right.
So they put it in the backyard.
Right.
You know, no one knew that it was
Right.
carcinogenic.
It was just stuff.
Right. It was
Right.
just coal ash. So-
Right. Wow. So, obviously, you have had to have a lot of perseverance.
Yes.
I doubt if you've been making a living on this property all these years.
No.
So you have other work you're doing to actually generate revenue and make a living.
Yes,
Yeah.
I've had to do that.
Right.
I've had to do that.
Yep.
You know, it's interesting. You know, you put money in, and
Right.
you know, and then you get to a point where it's like, you know, you're rowing across a river.
Right.
Then you're halfway there,
Right.
and then you start saying, well, do I
Right.
go back or do I keep going?
Right.
And then eventually you keep
Yep.
going. But I think. You know, I think you just have to work at it.
Yep.
I mean, I love what I do, and
Yep.
I have no
Yeah.
regrets.
Yeah.
I have no regrets.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. You have to love what you do. I mean, if you didn't have a passion
Right.
for what you're doing, there's no way you would have gotten through this long, arduous journey.
Right.
You would have given up a long time ago.
I think in many ways, one of the things that attracts me to these types of projects is really a respect and an acknowledgement for the everyday worker who I always envisioned coming to work in 1905, trying to feed his family and
Right.
raise his children, and working with a craftsmanship that this building will be here 100 years from now.
Right.
And to me, in many ways, in doing this, I'm really trying to pay homage
Yeah.
to what those men
Right.
went through.
You're honoring the immigrants
I
who
am.
really built America in so many ways and built Rockville.
Yes,
And you're honoring your grandparents who came from Italy, who made sails.
that's right.
So there's a deep roots
Yes.
aspect to what you're doing.
It's very true.
Yeah.
I think it's important.
Yeah.
You know, listen, you know, not every building needs to be preserved.
Right.
You know, I'm not some radical.
Right.
And you know, for years I sat on the architectural review board in Westport, where
Okay.
I live, and you know, there's always a group that wants to save something.
Right.
And, you know, and I look and I just
Right.
think, you know, it's not.
You have to pick your battles.
You have to pick your battles, and not every, just because it's old doesn't mean it's
Right.
worth saving.
Right.
And you have to remember that.
Right. What is as we start to wrap up, what's your impression of the health and vitality of the economy here in Connecticut? From an architect's perspective.
Well, you know, you can have an opinion, and then I can share a fact with you.
Right.
And that fact is that without Governor Malloy initiating this CHAMP funding program, which stands for Competitive Housing for Multifamily Project,
Okay.
without that assistance,
Okay.
this project would not have happened. Because, and I can also say that I have other friends who are developers who have closed recently on their projects because we just need that extra, you needed that extra
Right.
boost. Now,
Right.
when you look at that and then you'll realize, okay, so now we have jobs coming, and
Right.
so the whole
Right.
cycle
It's-
is going to start.
Right. Well, this half hour flew by. What is your website for your architectural firm?
Well, it's www.studio, capital A dash capital D.com.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
Great. And thank you for watching. Please visit our website, TollandCountyEconomy.com, TollandCountyEconomy.com. One of the things we do is we track local job openings. Perhaps there will be some jobs here at Roosevelt Mills. We'll find out from Joe, and we'll get the word out to our listeners. So visit the website, sign up for our emails, and we'll see you next week.